I want to talk to you today about scarcity and specifically how a scarcity mindset can limit you in negotiations. And we're going to keep a very focused thread on the scarcity mindset and how it can limit you in negotiations. And we're going to look at why it has usually very little to do with your negotiation skill. Now, we are assuming that you do have negotiation skills. If you've never negotiated or you have novice skills, then be mindful of that, right? Because negotiation is a skill. Now, I want to be really transparent too. I'm probably going to stutter and have a hard time recalling my words in this episode as well. I'm very much in the raw, no makeup. I'm just a very real person at the end of the day. If that bothers you, so sorry, probably not the person for you. But I unfortunately am and just running through some health issues, which is why things have been a little sparse lately. So love your prayers over just healing and health and God's will in my life. But just give me grace as we go through today's episode. If you see my eyes wandering, it's because I actually am reading more of a script than anything because I am just struggling with articulation and communication today. But with that being said, I really do want to talk about the scarcity mindset in regards to negotiations. And I think it's very fair that most of us, again, we are assuming that you do have negotiation skills or you're at least familiar, right? You're not just a beginner. But a lot of times we will assume, even when we're proficient in negotiations, that if we struggle negotiating, if we, undersell ourselves, our value, or concede too early, or walk away with less than we had leverage for, then the fix is, let me just get a better technique. Let me just do more. Especially right now, it does feel like there is a message on social media, if you follow the business world, where it's just like, do more. And it's all about the skill or the technique or the reps. And very rarely is it looking at the psychology and the nervous system. And I do believe you have to look at both sides because your psychology will hinder your ability to implement. And if you don't have the correct skills or you don't have the correct container, you're not doing it in the correct order, then that also can hinder you. So today we're just going to look at the psychology of this. So with that being said, we're assuming that the issue is a scarcity mindset that is hindering either your soul or your nervous system or both in negotiation. So it has nothing to do about anchoring, nothing to do about silence or any of the tactics. Now, in my clinical experience, I'm an executive advisor. I've worked with, over 1,000 clients. I've done over 1,000 psychometrics in my almost 11 years of doing this. And I love doing executive advising. I love performance psychology. I love diagnosing. I love helping people see the humanism in deals and really thinking about how to articulate a message to a certain audience member. So I am biased in the fact that I really believe a lot of the issues to when strategy or technique isn't working is usually more psychological than anything else, because all of these business books assume that you have a healthy nervous system and you have a healthy soul, or, more so, I guess, assumes the nervous system. And I don't know anything but a broken nervous system personally. I don't know anything but trauma. And part of my health issues that I'm running through right now do link back to my trauma. So if you're like me, sometimes it's like I'm doing all the reps and I'm doing everything correct, but it's not working. And what I see with all of my clients is because there's a psychological piece there. And that's what I want to look at, right? What I see with my clients are the tactics are usually fine. Typically there's strategy and there's skill there and there's education. Do they need to get a little fine-tuned? Do we need to be surgical at times? Absolutely. But what I see more times than not, even when I help an executive just with their golf game, which is always fun, is what's actually happening is that a much older belief system has taken over the moment the stakes get real. And a lot of times this belief system is your unconscious mind. Now, I personally am going to say something that might be controversial to those who study the brain. I don't believe in the subconscious. The reason I don't believe in the subconscious is because in my 10 plus years of studying neuropsychology and reading articles, I have never seen a peer-reviewed article that says subconscious. I haven't. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but the mind is a theory. You have to remember that we can't see the mind underneath any imaging. It's conceptual, right? And so I believe in the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. That I 100% believe in. And in my experience, when people talk about the subconscious mind, they're really talking about the unconscious mind. But I just need you to be on the same page when I go through this, right? So what I see happening more times than not is that older belief system takes over the moments the stakes get real. And again, it is unconscious. And I've even seen where it's really just the nervous system, the animalistic aspect of us hijacking us, right? And so those are all things that we have to consider, because our belief systems, our core beliefs, are typically developed between age 0 and 4, because this is where you're the most conditioned, right? Like your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until 25 for females and 28 to 30 for men. Like, we don't fully understand life at this age, but this is how our identity is really created. Our core beliefs are created. And I see identity as your perspective, your mindset, your self-talk, your language, your values, and your core belief. Now, when you're a kid, you're just going off of lived experience and what you're being told because you don't know any better. So what I want to really do in this episode is walk through the psychology of how a scarcity mindset could hinder your negotiation skills, and where a scarcity mindset actually comes from, what it does to your sense of self in high stakes conversations. It can even show up in high pressure situations, and why, in my opinion, understanding the root matters way more than, drilling the skill. By the way, hard skills are 1,000 times easier to learn than soft skills, in my opinion, but that's just me. Let's first start with what scarcity actually is, because I think a lot of people misunderstand it. When I say scarcity mindset, a lot of times people think materialistic things or money, right? They think tangible things. But scarcity isn't really about money. That is just a symptom. That is just one of the ways it manifests, right? So that's the pathology of it. But at its core, a scarcity mindset is fear of poverty. Now, again, I say poverty, people go money, but fear of poverty carries a huge belief underneath it. So the scarcity mindset and fear of poverty is a huge umbrella term. It consists of a lot of ways it can manifest, right? But the bottom line is there's never enough, right? And maybe that relates, because I don't know a single type A person who doesn't or hasn't at some point struggled with this. Now, here's the piece that matters clinically, in my opinion. That belief doesn't just stay out in the world, meaning there's never enough water bottles, there's never enough books, there's never enough, like, whatever that tangible thing is, there's never enough money, I don't make enough money. Very much it applies to the external world, but it also applies inward too. Not just inward with yourself, but also inward towards other people, just that relationship we have with others, and even the relationship you have with God, right? In fact, this is why the Bible actually talks about sonship and belonging and just knowing that you are more than enough, because that's one of the antidotes to the scarcity mindset. So here's the thing. If there's never enough out there in the world, if you never have enough money, right? Because usually we've never quantified what is enough, or that fear of running out or losing what we have. Like, there's really never enough to fill that void, because it's always connected to the fear of the unknown. And this is how these roots work. They entangle with each other. And then you've got to surgically untangle them and deal with them one-on-one before you will get, quote unquote, free from them, right? So that scarcity mindset is going to work with catastrophizing. It's going to work with there's never enough. It's going to work with the fear of the unknown. And it's going to kind of make you frantic very, very quickly. So while we're just dealing with one part of the equation here, there's other parts before you can kind of like finish the equation. I hope that makes sense. Again, brain fog, so I hope I'm making sense. But basically, if you always believe there's never enough out there, then somewhere along the way, you also start to believe that you are never enough. And maybe you experienced that message as a kid. Maybe you experienced, or maybe you still believe now, that you are inadequate, and that the shortage is in some way a reflection of your own worth and your own capacity, your own ability to achieve, right? And this is why so many high performers collapse all these threads into one and say, my worth is directly connected to what I can achieve, which is just a bunch of baloney at the end of the day. So scarcity isn't only a belief about resources and the external world, it can also become a belief about your identity, about your value, about love, about, does this person love you? Do you love them? Do you feel loved? Is there ever enough to satisfy that ache of I want more, right? Because a lot of times there's an emotional neglect wound coming out of this scarcity mindset too. And so the distinction is the whole reason it can show up so powerfully in negotiations, because if you only see a scarcity mindset in resources and external and not in identity or that internal world that's made up through relationships with ourselves, with others, and God, then you're kind of tripping yourself up, because when you sit down to negotiate, that intense, oh my gosh, there's never enough, or I'm going to mess this up, or I can't do this, is powerfully going to show up in negotiations, whether that be in your conscious mind, somatically in your body, or just in your nervous system. Because a negotiation for someone with this type of architecture, right, this type of internal operating system, isn't just about the deal. It actually becomes about them. So again, they collapse everything down into, if I do this, I'm worthy. If I don't, I'm unworthy. And you're already operating from a lens, from a perspective, part of your identity, that there's not enough, I'm not enough, right? So you're already starting with the glass half empty versus half full, right? Pessimistic thinking can manifest multiple ways, even into idealistic thinking. So I want to zoom out and just give you a larger framework, because scarcity, unfortunately, rarely travels alone, as I've mentioned. Now, in my work, I like to find the root issues. I don't like behavior modification. Let's change the root. Let's transform. Let's get forward. So in my work, a type A individual is essentially built by two core fears, right? And type A is just one quote unquote diagnosis we can use when I analyze a person to help identify what are the core roots. So the first is that fear of poverty that I just mentioned, that scarcity. There's never enough, right? Never enough attention, never enough love, never enough money, never enough whatever it is, right? This is why you'll sometimes fear losing your job, because it works with the fear of the unknown, going to manifest through catastrophizing and some other cognitive distortions as well. Now, the second belief is that love is earned. This is what keeps us in a performance mentality, right? And it's that sense that you have to prove your worth in order to be worthy of connection, acceptance, or belonging. Unfortunately, most of us had parents that applauded and rewarded our doing, but never our being. As humans, we are human beings. We are not human doings, yet every single high performer I know, especially the very successful ones, only see themselves as doing and performing and performing and performing. But when you operate with this mentality of I have to perform, what you're really doing is you're putting your worth up for negotiations. And so this type A thread, which is really produced from fear, is also, let's trace it down to the core root. Like I was saying, type A is a manifestation of fear, right? Because we've got fear of poverty, we've got the belief that love is earned. So that fear can create other things like anxiety, jealousy, unlovingness. Anxieties. And so if you see, this fear is actually a byproduct of rejection, because when a parent only loves you because of what you do and not for who you are, that naturally creates a sensation that you're not good enough. And so when you struggle with rejection, and this connects to negotiations, because when you struggle with rejection, and again, if you have fear, you have rejection issues. And so when you struggle with rejection, this is so fascinating to me, and I've seen it across the board with every single person I've worked with, right? Now, I've had this stuff too. I've been able to work through a lot of it. So when you have a rejection mindset, what happens, and this is unconscious, is anytime there's a person in front of you where you're ambivalent about the relationship and the label of that relationship, and if they like you and if you can trust them, which most relationships have a lot of ambivalence. And this connects to your structure too, because if you're someone who has a very small threshold, like I do, for ambivalence or ambiguity, then this can increase the anxiety and the rejection mindset at an unconscious level. But regardless, what happens when you have that rejection mindset is anyone in front of you who you're unsure if they like you or if they don't like you, or even if it's a strained relationship, right? So see it as, are you safe with this person or are you unsafe with this person? And if you come from a lived background of mainly having unsafe relationships, then your default is going to be, oh, I feel unsafe with this person. But when you're in front of a person with rejection mindset, what you do unconsciously is that person becomes your judge. And so you're studying them to see, do they approve of what you say? Do they like you? And pretty much when they deem you worthy, however you perceive that, right? Because that's going to be very personalized. And that's what one of my root analysis sessions will tell me, is how you personalize that. Then it affirms you're worthy or you're unworthy. Right? So That's why that person becomes a god. And when that person becomes a god to you, that also we know that you've got fear of man, because you need another human being to affirm of your existence before you allow yourself to be you. Now let's think about that in negotiation for a second, because I just told you a lot of psychological stuff that's happening. So in your mind, you're dealing with all of these fears and you're trying to go, am I safe with this person? Am I unsafe with this person? So basically you're double-minded, because you've got to focus on the negotiations and the deal, but you're also negotiating your self-worth if you have these fears and this rejection issue, right? And if you have fear, you have rejection. Now, here's the thing about rejection. It took me way longer than I want to admit to realize what is the core weed that produces rejection. And it's toxic shame. It made so much sense to me, right? Like, oh, that's why shame is in the 3rd chapter of the entire Bible, right? Because shame is the door for all of these horrific weeds. And I can go through them step by step, but we'll do that maybe another episode if you find it interesting. If you're on podcast, by the way, that probably didn't make sense, but I had a chart that pretty much has, if you see a garden in your mind's eye, toxic shame is the core root that produces rejection, and rejection produces fear. Now it produces other things, but we're just staying on that little surgical thread. When you have that, when you're double-minded, I kind of got ahead of myself, so I'll probably repeat. So when you're double-minded and you are dealing with the type A roots and you're dealing with fear of the unknown and you're dealing with fear of man, and that person's become your judge, right? You will start to change how you show up in negotiations. Now, don't get me wrong. Some people can power through this really easily, but they're still using energy to fight against it when they could put all of their energy into just the negotiations if they didn't have that scarcity mindset, because it's going to consume a lot of bandwidth. Okay, but just had a coughing fit, but nonetheless, one or both is always what's underneath the type A temperament. Now, I want to be really honest with you. Again, I've worked with over 1,000 clients. I don't really meet many genuinely type B individuals. Do I believe a type B person exists? Sure, I do, right? There's always the exception to the rule. What I see is it's more of a spectrum. Like sometimes when we think type A, we think about this hardcore, boom, this rigid definition of how the person should be, when it's not that way. It's much more of a spectrum, right? Sometimes you'll get 2 type A individuals in the same room, and if one has if one is less dominant than the other, then they'll naturally submit to the more dominant person. Is it always that way? Absolutely not. This is sometimes when their temperament then overrides that truth, right? There's always variables that you have to think about. Some people basically need less control than others. Some people just don't care, right? Whereas, the type A person has a lot of thinking traps if they're toxic. Type A is to some degree a level of toxicity. And so depending on how their type A is manifesting and the thinking traps that are participating in that type A, what is the infrastructure of that type A operating system, that's going to tell you so much about their need for control, their need for flexibility, and so forth. But nonetheless, it's a range. That's my point. And most high performers land somewhere within that type A range. But I want to connect this back to negotiations. Let's stay a little bit more focused. So what happens is when you sit down with this iOS, with this architecture running underneath you, a few things can happen. First, again, your self-worth is attached to your outcome, usually in this mindset or in this identity. So the number you walk away with stops being just a number and starts functioning as a verdict. And it's very all or nothing. I did it or I didn't do it, right? Because you're so overly outcome focused. Now, here's the reality. When you're in negotiations, it's a little bit like a game. And let's take soccer for a second, right? If I'm on the soccer field and I'm trying to win the championship game, if I'm thinking about winning, then where am I? I'm in the future, right? And so that's what we do in negotiations a lot of times. We think about winning. We think about what we want to achieve, which is important. But this is where discernment comes in, because when you're in the game, you cannot think about winning. You have to think about the moment, because when you are in the moment, when you are present moment aware and know how to live in the moment, you are able to put in more of your effort by the pieces that are actually on the field or on the board, right? Because if you are in the game and you're thinking about winning obsessively, then you're in the future versus in the present moment, meaning you're going to miss opportunities to improve or increase your effort, or to be flexible, or to pivot the plan because someone just did something that you weren't expecting, right? And this is why we got to be fully present at the end of the day. What happens again is that number you walk away with stops being just a number and starts functioning as a verdict. It's a measure of whether you're enough. And once that happens, again, this is happening unconsciously, you're not negotiating more. You're not negotiating what you think you're negotiating. You're actually going to start protecting yourself. And I see this all the time where you start to self-edit, you start to be less bold, less assertive, more apprehensive. And people don't advocate well for themselves when they're bracing to protect. At the end of the day, when you are trying to prove yourself to someone, you will not communicate as well as when you already know who you are and you've detached the umbilical cord that attaches your self-worth to the achievement or to the outcome, right? Because if I have to communicate why I should get this in negotiations and communicate that I'm worth what I say, that I'm proving to you that I belong and that I matter, I'm trying to negotiate two things simultaneously, right? Like that's selling you two offers when you just care about one. That is confusing. And I see it all of the time. Now, second, the love is earned root activates, right? Especially if you got that emotional neglect wound, because in that belief system, you have to prove your self-worth. And I don't think I've ever had a client who didn't attach their self-worth to some sort of outcome. It's very easy. I mean, I still do it, right? I catch it, I fix it, and I recalibrate, but it's a very, very realistic thing to do. And if you fail to, then the conclusion isn't, oh, the deal didn't go my way. It's I fell short, therefore I suck. That says something about me. I'm a POS. I should just go like off myself, right? Like whatever your narration is. Basically, your worth collapse into the results you receive. This is then going to increase pessimistic thinking and making you feel helpless. It's a messy place to live. It's chaotic. And then there's actually a third layer that often goes unnamed. And that scarcity isn't always about that external physical thing, right? It can be an internal relationship, a relationship with trust, with safety, with your own history, right? And it can carry low trust, as I've said before. So if some part of you believes people are against you, which I've ran into a lot of these high performers, or if your lived experience has taught you that things don't tend to work out for you, and then you arrive at the table already expecting the loss, right? Like this is how powerful our psychology can impact our business. I hope this is tracking because I've gone on a lot of tangents. But the threat isn't present before anyone has said a word, right? Like if you put all this together and the behavior will become very predictable, like to the point where this same equation can play out and hinder your golf game, right? Like if you were always crappy at sports and put a lot of pressure on yourself and just always wanted to be good at sports. And then you started getting good at golf and you like can't get better. It's sometimes because your nervous system is hijacking you. I see this all the time with my executives. Yeah, we talk about their golf game. It's important, right? So all of this becomes predictable. And this is one of the reasons why I can identify people so quickly because I've spent 10 years mapping all this out. So the scarcity mindset is going to accidentally cause you to lowball yourself or concede early, or become relatively easy to take advantage of, or it'll hinder your boldness or your ability to advocate and assert yourself or say, no, I'm not doing this. Or it'll cause you to fawn. It'll put you into a trauma response. And it's not because you lack skill, but it's because part of you already believes at the unconscious and nervous system level that you don't deserve more. And another part simply wants the discomfort to be over. This double-mindedness will hinder your ability to perform at your peak level. And I want to give you a few markers because recognition, right, that awareness is always going to be the first real step towards change. Let me give you 3 markers. Okay, so first, if you feel relief the moment you concede, before you've actually evaluated whether it was a good decision, that relief is sometimes worth paying attention to. Really pay attention to how it shows up in your body too. Tension is gone, maybe the thought is gone. Like notice how it manifests. It's often the internal threat switching off, not just your judgment being satisfied, right? So there's a nervous system component there. And so we want to track, like, how is the body, because the body keeps a score, how is the body manifesting that? Like, what is the feeling inside? Where do you release the tension? What does it feel like in your body? The second thing is you might tend to rationalize after the conversation rather than during it. Did you know rationalization is, in my opinion, the number one way high performers disassociate? Rationalization is a form of disassociation, so be mindful. Just like intellectualization is also a form of disassociation. Terrifying, right? We all have trauma responses. The strategic justification is going to arrive on the drive home, most likely. You're going to rationalize, intellectualize why it needed to go this way, especially if you're someone who likes to be analytical and in your head or likes to play the what if game. Now, that's usually the reasoning, but the reasoning part of your mind coming back online and constructing a narrative that the fear had already decided, right? It's going to help self-soothe because you need that reality to now support your identity. 3, holding your position feels more dangerous than giving it up. When the ratio is inverted, when standing firm feels riskier than losing ground, right? Really pay attention to those childhood fears. Like for me, when I stand my ground in front of an adult, I sometimes get scared I'm going to get in trouble. And I have the fear of getting in trouble. Like my mom's going to get mad at me. Like I'm a 37-year-old woman. I own my own home. Like my mom's not going to get mad at me. But that fear is real for me because my mom always got mad at me for like everything. Or sometimes I spoke the truth and a knife was on my throat. Like that was my lived reality. So really pay attention to kind of like the memories that quickly come through your mind or some of those really like identity forming experiences you had as a child that still haunt you. Some people have great metacognition, some people don't. So I'm trying my best to help you grow yours. But nonetheless, that's a signal you're running on the scarcity logic rather than business logic. Now, honestly, if you recognize yourself in even just one of those, I would gently suggest it isn't a character flaw. Please don't think that. And it's really not a skill gap. Sure, there's elements of that, but usually it's an architecture. It's an internal operating system. It's a being gap. And it's important to understand why the tactics never fully solved it. And you can't out-negotiate a belief that you're not enough, unfortunately. That's why having God, like I like Jesus because I've studied all the religions. It's the only one that makes the most sense and doesn't contradict itself. That's why belonging and sonship is so important, because when you have clear belonging, when you're clear that you are enough, which is a big message of the gospel, then it's easier to feel adequate. And it's a very transcendent place to be, right? So the root is not the room. It's in the identity structure you carried into the room. And that's the layer that actually has to be addressed. Very few people seem to address it. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Thank you for being patient with me. If you consistently undersell yourself in negotiations, the work isn't another tactic. It's not another strategy. It's not another hard skill. The work is understanding and eventually resolving the belief underneath, which is that there isn't enough and that you aren't either. And it's a bunch of baloney, right? You've got to realize you've got to do the work that you are enough and that there's plenty out there, right? This is why having a relationship with God is powerful, because you can start to trust God with the unknown, right? Matthew 6 talks about this. The leverage was always yours. What you lose access to in the moment is the ability to hold it, right? Because something way more scary and intangible is actually on the line in your mind's eye, because the number has quietly become a test of your worth. And when your worth is no longer on the table, you negotiate it very differently. Abundance, not in the like woo-woo, I can't stand woo-woo crap, not in the woo-woo sense, right? Abundance in this sense isn't something you talk yourself into across the table. It's what's left once your worth is no longer up for negotiation. It's a breach you have to heal with yourself, sometimes with others, because usually there's an emotional neglect wound. There's some sort of trauma. And then I also think you've got to heal that with God too, right? Like we are spiritual beings, regardless if you want to believe that or not. But nonetheless, if this was useful, let me know. Send me a comment, send me some fan mail, send me an email. You can email us at support@elizabethlewis.com or info@elizabethlewis.com. And if you want to go deeper, let me know. I'm doing my best to get weekly episodes out. For a while there, I was getting like 2 or 3. And then unfortunately, I ran into some health issues, which hopefully will be relieved soon. I'd appreciate your prayers on those health issues as well. And just like, let me know if this was useful. I really want to make my content rich, but real, because I think there's a lot of BS messages out there. In the meantime, I'm rooting for you.